Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 535. My opponent played d4 here. I played knight f6, planning to get into a Nimzo Indian, I think I wanted. And my opponent plays the third choice here after c4, which is the normal move, or knight f3. The third choice is bishop to g5, the Trompowsky. Now the main way to meet this, although there are a number of different ways to play against this, including d5, which allows the exchange and the messing up of the pawn structure, or knight to e4 is the most popular choice. And I think that's what I usually play, knight to e4 after the bishop moves, and then I play d5 to hold on to that knight, try and maintain it there, and then if it gets kicked back, it can drop back to the d6 square, if that looks like a good square at the time. Anyway, I played something different this time. I was a little bit unsure, and I just played e6, and this is the second choice there. It's a fine move. It's maybe not quite as not quite as aggressive as this knight e4 move, but still leads to okay game for black. And now white transposes into more of a queen's gambit type position with c4. So to stay in Trompowsky lines, I guess knight to f3 or e4 seem like logical moves. e4 is nice, takes advantage of the pin and threatens to push on to e5 and just win that knight, so you have to react to that. Anyway, he played c4, setting up for a typical queen's gambit kind of structure. I went bishop e7 here, which is not a bad move, even though it's not in the book. Let's see, h6 or bishop b4 check are two moves in the book, but this is okay. Just breaks the pin and puts a stop to any idea of playing e4. And then white continues with knight c3. Now notice there's no games in the opening database in this position. And then after knight c3, if I were to play d5, we're suddenly in a position with 1,200 games. What's happened is that we've transposed into kind of a normal queen's gambit declined type of position if I were to play d5. But I didn't. I played h6, and we're just out of the book. But you see, this is about an even position, so nobody has gone horribly wrong here. He drops his bishop back. I castle. And I was feeling that maybe I would have a little less space, but it looks like I have good equalizing chances here in this position, so nothing to worry about. Knight f3, normal developing move. Now I decided to go with this Benoni structure with c5, which is, interestingly enough, that showed up as one of the engine choices. Sometimes, this is a bit of a risky decision playing this c5 move. The Benoni structure is often good for white, where he gets a lot of space, but his pieces, the knight here and the bishop here, are not typical positions for those pieces in the Benoni. So maybe this is okay. Let's see. Well, yeah, he pushes on with d5, so we get that. It looks like white's best try for an advantage here is actually to take the pawn. And I was playing to take back with the bishop, and then I guess a3. So he's preparing to play b4 and kick the bishop, and he's just sort of asking me how I want to develop. I would bring the knight out to c6. And we get a position where maybe after e3, maybe white's a little bit better. He can always gain a tempo on this bishop. There was also the idea of playing queen c2, I think. Looks like white's pretty comfortable here, slight edge. But he pushed on with d5, so going into this Benoni structure, so I took. And then instead of just taking back, which is what I expected, and it's probably the best move here, he took off the knight. So he voluntarily gave up the bishop pair and put my bishop on a good diagonal. Not that one. This diagonal. It's a good diagonal for the bishop and the Benoni because you end up with pawns here and here. So you have a lot of control over the dark squares. So that's where you want the bishop. In fact, I was talking about how white's pieces are a bit off for a Benoni. My pieces are a bit off too. Normally you fianchetto this bishop in a Benoni and look out on those dark squares for the reasons I mentioned. So bishop takes, this helps me out, and now you see black starts to get an edge in the opening. Takes, I put my pawn on d6, and then he plays e3. He could have gone on to e4, but I guess both of them are okay moves here. e3 controls this square, so I guess maybe I had an idea of trading off this knight and cementing a bishop on the d4 square. I'm not sure. Anyway, he takes control of that square. I develop my bishop to g4, pinning his knight. And I need to make room for my knight to come out. Well, let's see, he plays bishop e2. Of course, before playing a move like knight d7, you have to make sure this bishop isn't getting stranded out here. He can't retreat to this square because of his advanced d pawn, and sometimes the e pawn will take away this square. But it looks like it's fine in this particular case. Just something to check. So he drops knight d2, drops the knight back, encouraging some exchanges, which I think are okay for me. With a Benoni, you have a little less space typically, especially over here on the king side. So I'm not worried about these trades. And that was his good bishop, the light squared bishop there. He did take away the bishop pair, so I don't have the bishop pair advantage anymore. But I have an easy plan to expand on the queen side. And I just kick in with that. Plays a4 to stop it. And I play rook b8. What's interesting is that I could already play b5. There was one point that I missed here. If I play b5, I thought he could just take it. He takes, I take, and let's see, he could take with the knight, but he has to take the rook off first because his, or he could have castled there too. That's an interesting idea. But I was thinking he would grab the rook because his rook was hanging there and then take the pawn. And what I missed is that in this position, his pawn on d5 is hanging, so I can get my pawn back immediately. Also, I have queen to d5. Let's see, would it have happened differently? Let's suppose instead of taking my rook, he could also castle. Oh, but then I have time to defend the pawn. So it's only by taking that he can try and grab the pawn, and that lets me get the d-pawn back. So if we go back to that line, he takes, I take, he grabs the pawn, and I grab on d5. And I've got these nice two pawns here. He's got one isolated pawn over here, so I have a little more center control, and I have a target, which actually I'm already threatening to win that pawn. So, and he needs to castle to get his king to safety. So I'm just coming out a pawn up in this line. So that would have been good, the immediate b4 or b5. I just didn't calculate ahead far enough there. I played rook b8, giving up most of my opening advantage actually at that point. He goes knight d to e4. Okay, brings his knight in. I decide to take this knight off. My bishop was under attack, and I didn't find any great square for it. Although the engine likes bishop e5. I did briefly consider bishop e5, but I wasn't sure it might just be a target there. But I guess he has to, if he wants to push the bishop around, he has to create some pawn weaknesses. So interesting. Anyway, I just traded the bishop off. He took back with the pawn. Yeah, that's a mistake. I was expecting him to take with the knight and keep his pawn structure together. So after he takes back with the pawn, then I can safely push on with b5 and get a passed pawn over here. And he castled. I was thinking he could take. Well, they're about equal, but castling is okay. See, all through this, there's a slight edge to black, but not really a winning advantage. They didn't play the best move at that one point. And so still a slight edge, but white's still very much in the game. I decided to push on with b4 here, try and create a passed pawn. He takes. I take back. And yeah, this turns out to be good for white. Knight d6 here. Okay, so here he could play knight d6. That's funny. Let's back up for a moment. There was an earlier opportunity for him to play knight to d6. It's right here. He went with knight d4. He took with a pawn, and then I played b5. And right here I asked myself, can he take this pawn? And if he tries it here, it doesn't work out because I have knight b6. So I have I'm hitting his knight, and I'm hitting this pawn in the center. And if his knight drops back, when I take the pawn, it's actually a actually I can't take it. Sorry, knight f5 is a tricky move. He's threatening here. So what do? I play queen f6, hitting the knight. Okay. Now there was another line where let's see, if the knight goes back to e5, this is the line. e4, I can take here, hitting his knight, and he's got pawn weaknesses all over the place, so this is a good position for me. I think I pick up another pawn here, and the knight has to move. Let's see, so let's look at that knight f5 line. So I can't take the pawn, it's indirectly threatened, protected by this knight fork. So queen to f6 here, hitting the knight, and queen to c2, defending, and then I can pick up the pawn And once again, I just have a better pawn structure here and more active pieces, and he still hasn't castled. So I'm in good shape if he tries to grab the pawn at that point. So I stopped worrying about it and just pushed on. But at some point after this exchange, right here, now it's a good time for him to grab there. That's interesting. So if he grabs now, let's take a look at this. Knight f6 or knight b6. Okay, knight f6 maybe is a little better in this case. He can play this knight f5 trick. Queen to d7 hitting his knight. Queen to c2 defending. And the queen on c2 is hitting this pawn here. So if I grab on d5, also rook f to d1 would pin the rook. So that's would pin the knight. So how about if I went knight b6 here? Is there a flaw with that one? Again, knight to f5, queen to f6. Looking at the rook, looking at the knight, queen to c2 defending and also hitting. And now knight takes d5 and rook a d1 hitting the knight. Rook to d8 defending. How about if I just move the knight away? This knight doesn't have many good squares, does it? And this pawn is still hanging. So this is a little bit better for white. So I kind of took my eye off of that d6 square, sorry, the d6 square for that critical moment, and he could have taken advantage of it there. With best play, still just a slight edge to white, but definitely an improvement on the game. He dropped his knight back to g3. Let's see, I played a5 here, just kind of cementing the rook in there and getting the pawn out of the glare of the queen. The queen was threatening. And he comes in here, knight f5, again looking at my... so that was his idea, was to reposition his knight this way, but a more effective way to reposition it was to take the d6 pawn. Okay, so I went knight b6 here, protecting my pawn. Goes a4, building up his center, and I grabbed the pawn. And what's interesting is this is once again not the best move. What should I be playing here? Rook e8. Well, that makes sense. Pull the rook out and put the pressure on this guy. Okay, so I grabbed a pawn over here, and he could play queen c2 and counterattack the knight and get an even game. He played queen g4 instead, going for the attack on my king. But I have a good defense in queen f6, defends the pawn, defends the h6 square, which is important because of knight takes h6 tricks. Always got to watch out for. Pushes on with f4. And at that point, yeah, at this point, his game really goes downhill. He's still in the game at this point with a move like f3, holding onto the center, and I'm just a pawn up over here on the on the queen side. But this knight, if the knight moves, actually he's going to grab that pawn. So it's not clear that's such a great pawn. You know, I would probably put my hopes more in this protected passer on the c file. So anyway, he's still in the game to this point. But when he plays f4, it's just pushing ahead a little too recklessly with the attack, giving up the e-pawn. I mean, the idea of f4 to support e5 is a good one, but he just drops the e-pawn immediately, and so that's no good. And then when he lifts his rook, he drops the rook in the corner. So that's how the game ended. So kind of a quick finish, but an interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.